hand over to Nicole, Suzanne, and Melvin, who will be taking us through the slides. And then they've definitely said they will leave time for questions, comments, and challenges afterwards, which I will chair. And please feel free to post them in the chat, or I'll bring people in if you'd like to actually put your hand up and ask you a question or make your point directly. So handing over to you, I believe, Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me share my slides and let me know if you see them. Okay, good morning, afternoon, and evening from wherever you are. We are actually from, as Tom mentioned, the Singapore Center for Character and Citizenship Education. This center is actually a year old, so we really look forward to learning from everyone. Okay, so I'm Suzanne, and I'm going to start first, and then my colleague Melvin and Nicole will share. So I thought we'll start by giving you a bit of background first about Singapore, where we come from, before we talk about character and citizenship in Singapore. So Singapore history is a mix of East and West. We were colonized by the British for over 100 years, so many of our laws and education continues to be influenced by the British. After our country became independent in 1965, the government marketed or branded Singapore as a global city. So we are one of the most open economies in the world. This is a quote from our former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. He said that to succeed, Singapore must be a cosmopolitan center able to attract, retain, and absorb talent from all over the world. So today, you can see in terms of our infrastructure, the government has invested a lot in developing this global city infrastructure in terms of like the port. We have a very busy container port connected to 600 ports globally. Our airport is one of the busiest in Asia. Finance, we're one of the leading financial centers after Hong Kong and others. Ranked one of the most open and competitive economies, and we have a lot of multinational corporations in Singapore. Okay, so another thing to note is that, Singapore is a multicultural society. So we comprise about 74% Chinese, 14% Malays, 9% Indians, and 3% others, which are, Eurasians and other minority groups. And so another important strategy that the government made in the early years was to build this sense of multicultural unity. So various laws in Singapore, like the multiracial, multi-religious laws, basically says that you cannot you cannot disrespect another religion or another group. We have housing policies where our public housing, we have an ethnic kind of quota to ensure that the one race doesn't dominate. A very important policy is our bilingual policy, which is to institute English as a first language. It was controversial in the early years. So English is now the first language, so everybody speaks English as a first language. In fact, the mother tongue, the ethnic language is spoken sometimes as a second language. And the reason is that English is not just a global language of business, it's also a language that is a lingua franca, connecting different races. Okay. Now, to create this sense of unity among this multicultural populace, another important strategy was the introduction of what is called shared values. This was introduced in 1990. And the government at the time was concerned with liberal values of the time. So there was this controversy over Asian values, so to speak. But you can see that, there are actually 5 shared values: the nation before community, society above self, family as the basic unit of society, community support and respect for the individual, consensus, not conflict, racial and religious harmony. So Singapore's shared values, you can see, emphasizes communitarian values, highlighting the importance of community rather than the individual. Some scholars have commented that a lot of these shared values bear close resemblance to Confucian ideals. So I want to talk a little bit about this, the philosophical basis of these shared values, because they inform the way we enact character and citizenship in Singapore. Okay, so let's look a little closely at the philosophical underpinnings. Okay, so today we hear about human flourishing. It's a common buzzword in many policies and many government documents. But Confucian ideals of human flourishing maybe share some commonalities, but also some distinctions. Typically, people might refer to the Aristotelian idea of eudaimonia when we talk about human flourishing. Okay, so I want to highlight some distinctions. So like Aristotle, Confucius also proposed this teleological philosophy, where telos refers to ultimate ends and corresponds closely to the Latin perfectum, which means reaching a kind of completion or the perfect actualization of a thing. For Aristotle, the telos of human flourishing occurs through the full cultivation and exercising of virtues like intellectual, moral, civic, and performance virtues that the Jubilee Center has articulated in their framework. This is the idea of reaching one's full potential, or what Chris Jensen terms nature fulfillment. Now, in the same way, Confucius also has this teleological philosophy, and Confucius also talks about the habitual practicing of virtues, what he calls li or rituals, the ritual practicing. But the kinds of virtues are what we call harmony-related virtues, things like dispositions like benevolence. I want to also add that within these harmony-related virtues, they are not just all passive. Actually, criticality is also a harmony-related virtues. Throughout the Analects, Confucius is always engaging in critical evaluations of governments and kings. So criticality is an important part of what is called the harmonious order. So Confucius also talks a lot about the routine practicing of rituals and virtues through everyday social interactions. But the telos is not for the self. The telos is for what is called cosmopolitan harmony. Okay, so here we see another distinction. In the Aristotelian tradition, oftentimes the ultimate end is the emphasis on human agency, freedom, opportunities to develop a full life. For example, Amartya Sen and Nussbaum have used Aristotelian ideas to develop the human capability approach, where they speak about living well. And the idea of living well is the ability to have agency, choice, and freedom to choose the life that one scripts, right? This is the human capability approach. However, in the Confucian perspective, at its heart is this spiritual humanism that conceives heaven, earth, and human beings as part of this cosmological world order. And man's purpose is to cultivate this way of heaven called the Tao through learning and practice in order to reach this harmony between heaven and all nature on earth. And this is the essence of what is called the cosmological harmony, cosmological flourishing. It's an ecological idea. Now, when it comes to what does this mean for politics and a political order in the Aristotelian tradition, it could mean aiming at self-sufficiency through the recognition of freedom, through the recognition of equality. But in the Confucian tradition, justice has a more communitarian focus, where Confucius talks about the person who wants to succeed helps another succeed. So justice is aimed not just at the self-flourishing, but aimed at enabling others to flourish. Is a more other-centric kind of worldview. Okay, so what does this have to do with character and citizenship? So Confucianism has often been stereotypically associated with filial piety. But when we read its philosophical ideas, it's actually a more expansive idea. So the essence of self-cultivation is really to transcend the self, the self-centeredness. It is to reach this idea of the cosmopolitan ethos, to disrupt the ego, ethnocentrism, nationalism, and all kinds of parochialism. And the idea is to reach a kind of dynamic harmony. This is antithetical to uniformity and conformity. It is a kind of coexistence with difference in the world. Okay, so another classical Confucian scholar Mencius talks about this idea that, you know, it is important to cultivate these types of harmony meta virtues. So for example, you know, he says, you know, without a heart of compassion, we are not human. Without a heart of shame, we are not human. Without a heart of concession, we are not human. Without a heart of right and wrong, we are not human. A heart of compassion is the seed of humanity. A heart of shame is the seed of duty. A heart of concession is the seed of propriety. And a heart of right and wrong is the seed of wisdom. And these four seeds are as much a part of us as our limbs. To possess them and deny the potential is to wound yourself. We all possess these seeds and we understand how to nurture them. So I think these ideas are also similar in Aristotle, right? There's this idea of the potential virtues innate in human beings and the idea of cultivating them and practicing them in daily life. So one implication then is of the task of education is really to cultivate these moral feelings for people who are different. Mencius talks a lot about this idea of moral expansion, that it is innate in us to love someone who is near, like our family. But how do we push our students to expand this to people who are different, our community, our nation, our world, and beyond our society? So human flourishing in this sense goes beyond the individual. It is continually expanding. It is continually disrupting the borders that we set. In this sense, it is cosmopolitan in its orientation. However, I've spoken a lot about Confucius, but going back to Singapore as a multicultural society, I also want to mention some of the other Asian philosophers, or rather the religious thinkers and philosophers who have emerged from Asia. At the National Institute of Education, we recently launched an ethics course where we have introduced our students. It's a core course to not just Aristotle, John Dewey, and the important philosophers in the West, but we also want to introduce them to the key philosophers in Asia as well. So many of these thinkers, for example, also are aligned with this cosmopolitan ethics. So we think about Jesus and how he speaks about the greatest commandment being to love God, but to love our neighbor as ourselves. And if we recall during his time, the neighbors were the enemies of the Jews, the Samaritans. The medieval Muslim philosopher Al-Farabi, another very important thinker, who is known as the second teacher after Aristotle in the Muslim communities, spoke a lot about flourishing societies, not so much the flourishing individual, but how society as a whole can flourish through multicultural orientations, through democratic norms, where everyone learns to cooperate and coexist with difference. And another very important philosopher, Tagore, right, spoke about the dangers of nationalism. He himself lived through some of the violence of nationalism. He set up schools and universities, emphasizing this notion of intercultural empathy and cosmopolitan commitments. So before I pass on to my colleague, I just want to summarize and say that, you know, these philosophical ideals have been important to character and citizenship in Singapore's multicultural context. It's been fundamental to also how we think about human flourishing in both individual and collective ways. So in Singapore, CCE is not nationalist-based. It may have been so in the early years of independence, but today it has shifted away from this emphasis on nationalism and loyalty to the state. As a global city, our values need to be more cosmopolitan rather than nationalistic. On the other hand, it also does not support a kind of critical orientation that maybe focuses a lot on social justice. Criticality is important, but it is undergirded by what we call harmony as a meta virtue. So if you can see this diagram here, if harmony is cosmopolitan harmony is a meta virtue, these includes aligned virtues like benevolence, empathy, truth. Justice is also part of this, as well as integrity, sincerity. So what does this mean in practice? In terms of our philosophy and principles, it's directed towards cosmopolitan harmony, via an ecological approach, where every person in the school system, your leaders, your teachers, your parents, your caretakers, care students, are all accountable to one another for the flourishing of others. What does this mean in terms of policies? It counters the egocentrism of many of these child-centered philosophies that place the child at the center of education by supporting the meta virtue of harmony and related virtues, which means that knowledge, skills, and routines are not just for the sake of the neoliberal economy, but it is meant to build the ethical ends of individual and collective flourishing. And finally, in pedagogies, in terms of pedagogies, it's about facilitating also critical engagements with issues rather than developing just passive citizens. And the idea is that criticality is important for world building and building this cosmopolitan order where people can live and dialogue across differences. Okay, so I'll stop here and hand over the time to Melvin. I focused on the philosophical underpinnings of character and citizenship, and my colleague Melvin will now talk about the psychological perspectives. Both the philosophical and the psychological are areas that we look at in terms of character and citizenship education. Okay, over to you, Melvin.
Thanks, Suzanne. Wonderful presentation. Okay, good day, everyone. So in this second session, I'm going to talk about the social psychological perspective. Okay. So in terms of human flourishing, there's a lot of interest across multiple fields of study, whether psychology, sports, or medical sciences, and there is a motivation to address a couple of questions. And in psychology, it's always been driven by the traditions of hedonic, which is the wanting to enjoy it for enjoyment, to attain happiness, to feel good, and also eudaimonia, where one wants to maximize one's potential, to seek fulfillment, and to have positive relationships with others. But put simply, I think in our work, one thing we thought was very important was actually to define or operationalize what flourishing is. So very put simply, flourishing is about two things: feeling good and functioning well. A more elaborate definition can be given as the optimal state of psychosocial functioning that arises from multiple psychological domains. So it could be as close as family, communities, and the social networks, but it could also be social domains like your emotions, meaning making, and many others. So within school settings, in the last 2 decades or so, we've seen a lot of headwinds into the use of positive psychology to better understand how to nurture students and how to develop their well-being and to think about holistic outcomes. So scholars have talked about or discussed widely that academic development is important, performance is important, and both are measurable outcomes. But let's also not forget well-being. And one of the positions is that well-being does not seem to be a priority in school systems even now. And one of the strategies in terms of improving this science is to develop or make available practical measures or instruments, because once we're able to measure what well-being is, we're able to better improve those systems. While well-being has been used in the literature, we understand that it's been used quite interchangeably, well-being or flourishing. One practical or rather pragmatic explanation, I mean, this is just my own take on it, is that because of the availability, widely used instruments that have been well validated internationally. So one explanation here is provided by Margaret Turn in some of the recent writings, where you say that it provides us with quite a simpler framework compared to flourishing, which can be quite abstract. And the next one. Yep. So many of us are familiar with Martin Seligman, who is one of the heavyweights in terms of positive psychology. And he proposed that in terms of what could be what one could mean or what one could reach the state of flourishing is when we can achieve high levels of 5 broad pillars of well-being. and he termed them positive emotions, engagement, positive relationship with others, developing a sense of meaning, and sense also of accomplishment. And I think in some of the earlier writings, he termed the first three as hedonic, which are the pursuit for enjoyment and happiness, and subsequently the R and A is related to the eudaimonia perspective. Now, the next click, you'll see this very popular, widely cited use model. Now, health wasn't in its original writing, so that was quite interesting to me because if you look at the bracket evolving, and what it means is that these well-being measures is not exactly a theory, but it's an empirical model where it can evolve as the needs arise. So I think in the last 10 years or so, the health domain has become, well, in fact, not in the last 10 years, it's been quite a long time that it's been, but scholars have paid quite a bit of attention to health as part of well-being. So the expansion of this model includes health as one of the components. And as we are toying with what models to use and what models are appropriate for the program there in Singapore, we also considered the contextual relevance. We thought that PERMA and based on some of the writings by the authors, there are certain aspects that sometimes could only manifest slightly later in life. So for example, if you're looking at children of 10 years old or 11 years old, they may not understand enough about relationships, they may not have enough experiences in terms of understanding the types of positive relationships that matter to them or meaning or types of accomplishment. So ePOSH is an alternative adolescent-centric or adolescent-oriented model that looks into the five central of well-being. They may not have certain components, but when Margaret Kern developed this model, she talks about the focus on the positive psychosocial functioning of adolescents, or what it means to live well. In our review, we've also considered like additional frameworks, mental health continuum, and of course the Harvard Flourishing program. But one of the criteria that we think of is what are the frameworks that would be more adolescent centric as appropriate to the population. And one of the point here is that although many of these models have been developed in the West, there has been a very strong trend of validation across many countries, cross-cultural countries. So this also gives us the confidence of the utility of these measures. Now I want to move on to very quickly to so we've looked at well-being measures. These are also within the positive psychology. These are strength-based frameworks. There's the character strength. I'm not going to talk too much about that. There's also the positive view development framework, which covers the positive view, the PYD framework. There are many different models, and the one that we're looking at, what they call the C models, most popularly known as the 5C. And in recent times, there have been development of the 6C, which is contribution. And I think in 2020, if I'm not wrong, there was a paper that introduced the 7C, which talks about creativity, and some have even talked about competence such as resilience or even coping as one of the competencies that skill sets that adolescents need to develop. So click on it. Yeah. So these are very briefly the five or six broad domains that's covered. So we can look at each umbrella term. Competence is not just looking at grades or academic competence or ability to do something, but it looks at various domains, going from the social to physical. And confidence, it covers a wide spectrum of constructs. And undergirding this PYD framework is also looking at and being able to identify enabling contexts that enable students to activate or exercise or even develop these competencies. So the next slide, this is something that I think Nicole will talk a bit more in length shortly. I just want to showcase this because this is the framework that we're using for CC Center. Can you click on it, Suzanne? Can you just click? Oh yeah. So there are three. I mean, the other models have 5 or 6 pillars. We have 3 central pillars that we would like to at least consider in our program. One, we consider the aims of purpose as something that's crucial, because purpose is about individual's intentionality and motivation to commit to a particular course of action. And the light and slightly darker sorry, let me just the light and slightly darker arrows signify basically the direction. So meaning that we think that purpose is a driving force of social emotional competencies. So therefore there's a darker arrow. But there is also a reciprocal, meaning that when students have developed sufficient competencies, it kind of reinforce the purpose that settles that they settle in, and so there may be a reciprocal effect as well. So the social emotional competencies is another domain that we're looking at, which can be described as skills that promote personal effectiveness, relationships, instill values, and building character. And undergirding these two broad domains or these pillars are values and virtues. As we look in the literature, we realize that a lot of the later writings tend to focus a lot on purpose, social emotional competencies. And we also was also looking at the Harvard Human Flourishing Program, where they also talk about virtues. Now, I think in a Singapore context, we look at both, or rather, we are interested in looking at both, because values tell you the why. They're aspirational. Someone could have a value of compassion, but if they don't have the virtue, they don't act upon it, they don't reinforce it, then that value is not likely to be robust or rigorous. So we're interested to study both the why and the hows. And again, I think under these 3 broad domains or other pillars, we consider it's also important to look at the conditioning factors. What are the types of social contexts? What are the prescriptive norms that may have guide some of the dispositions or competencies that students come into schools with. So we look into the protective factors, we look at promoting factors, also risk factors and turns. Turns is basically a sociological concept called like turning points, meaning that could we capture certain events that happens to young adolescents that may have changed their life course or changed their perspective or make them, well, for better or worse. So the next slide, just finishing up, so then you can just click it. So what I'm trying to do is basically to map the 3 pillars to some of the broad frameworks, the well-being frameworks and the strength-based frameworks. So you can see there's quite a substantial overlap. So for example, the life purpose contributes to, in terms of the well-being models, you can look at meaning and optimism, and then there are some arrows that's drawn to the strength-based models. And then the next one, if you look at the social emotional, Suzanne, you can click on it. Yep. So there are, yep, okay, maybe you can stay. Yep, so this one's resilience can go into 2 directions. Maybe you click on the last one. So this is a developing model. When we look at virtues and values, these are not the only ones that we're looking at, but this is some of these examples that we think that we consider as important. So one interesting point is that, first, for example, we look at something about security. Which may be a particular value that someone holds. But security could be a positive trait because it reinforces attachment to the social structure or to the social support factors. But then there could be a negative or a less desirable aspect of security that will be interesting to look at what it leads to in terms of both the well-being and the strength-based models. And I think that's where I stop. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Melvin. And so I mean, these are areas that our center is exploring at the moment. We are looking at not just what is a flourishing individual, but the conditions of a flourishing school and a flourishing society. What would that look like in terms of both philosophical and psychological perspectives? And now I'll turn to Nicole, who is going to share about the competencies, especially in our teacher education courses on character and citizenship education.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hi, everyone. Just to share with you that in Singapore, the National Institute of Education is the sole teacher training institute. So 100% of Singapore teachers are trained at NIE. And as Suzanne have shared earlier, our center is pretty new. We're about a year old. So I would like to share
استاذ
with you.
صوفي راه هذه بحد ذاتها كارونتي بوحدها والله لا جو دي با.
So I will share briefly about this framework. I won't go into it, but I'll just highlight to you what are some key aspects of this framework and how it actually structure the way we plan for teacher development, both pre-service and in-service for Singapore teachers. So Melvin has spoken quite a bit about the part in blue, which we call the essence of CCE, and why we think that purpose, values, and virtues, as well as social emotional competencies are important area to look at for our teachers to understand and then see how we can then help support students in the development of their purpose, in talking about virtues and discussions and engage them in talking about morals. And lastly, social emotional competencies allow them to then lift out the values. For us, we have, if you are familiar with CASEL, then you will know that CASEL will have 5 areas for social emotional competencies. In our center, we are also exploring and discussing whether or not we wanted to include one more on self-motivation beyond just self-awareness and self-management, because we feel that motivation that comes from purpose, that internal drive for that person to want to lift out its values and purpose in bettering others and not just for self is important in our context. The part in red is on enactment of CCE. It shares with our teachers or our student teachers about the way Singapore has structured that enactment or that space in the curriculum for the development of character and citizenship disposition. So integration into subject is something that is quite common, where we incorporate some of these issues into our English or into our science lesson where appropriate. But one thing that is unique in Singapore is the space within the curriculum that has been protected for discussion of contemporary issues, for discussions of values and virtues that is within the curriculum time, which means the timetable time for the students to engage with a discussion with their form teachers. Something that is also special is in the elementary schools, whereby the mother tongue teachers will then use certain time within the curriculum to talk about character as well as citizenship education. Because in Singapore, we believe that cultural roots play an important role in nurturing some of these values. And the part in yellow, I will not go into it, but it talks about the enablers for CCE, which we will be covering with educators to see how they can build the environment suitable for character education, because character is not just taught, but caught. So building the environment to enable character to be caught is also important. I will move on to the next one. I will not go into details, but just to share with you that in the National Institute of Education, we engage all our student teachers to let them know that as teachers, they are shapers of characters and custodian of value. And we have a model that emphasizes value at the center of every teacher. And we talk about the commitment to champion for the learner, the commitment to uphold the profession, as well as the commitment to work with the community to build that environment for the students to develop in. Next. This shows you a quick overview of some things that we have in NIE to strengthen values-based initial teacher preparation. So one thing is the group endeavors in service learning. In this, all our student teachers will come as a group, and then they will then get to come together to do a service learning. In this, they will broaden their knowledge and understanding of their community needs as well as challenges. It also enables them to think about how they can then design a learning for their students when they go to schools. We also have the Singapore Kaleidoscope that is more focused on giving the teachers or the student teachers a chance for deeper appreciations of Singapore's achievement and challenges, like what Suzanne has shared, how things have shifted, and then give them a platform to discuss and explore issues that is social, cultural, physical, environmental, or geopolitical issues in our curriculum time. We also have the professional practice and inquiry. This is an e-portfolio that all student teachers at the NIE will have. So it allows them to develop their teaching philosophy, to construct the conceptual map of their learning throughout their entire time with us at NIE. It also serves as a platform for them to articulate their core beliefs, crystallize their identity as a teacher, and challenge them to examine their own values as a teacher. If you see the left-hand column, so this is the CCE in Singapore context. You can move to the next one. So this is one of the core courses that all our student teachers have. In this, we cover the what, why, and how of character and citizenship education. This is a 13-week-long course where we will talk about policy initiative. We'll highlight to teachers the importance of social emotional competencies, as well as its impact on classroom culture. We talk about teacher identity, environment on child development, as well as pedagogical approaches and facilitation skills, because there is a stronger emphasis in recent years for engagement as well as dialogic learning in the classroom to build character. Next. Meranti program is a part of an orientation program, so it's not a course, but the Meranti one is on the orientation program before the start of their teacher education with us. So at that sessions, they have a better self-awareness, and they also gain the affirmation to choose teaching as a profession. Meranti 2 happens at the orientation program just before the start of the second semester, where they are introduced to social emotional competencies and then gain greater self-awareness for their own social emotional competencies. Meranti 3 is a session at the end, just before our student teachers leave us to join the teaching service. So we use that time to explore their teacher identities, as well as consolidate what they think are important roles that they play in shaping characters. So this shows the courses that our center have also for in-service teacher. So what I've shared earlier are what we put as emergent and for pre-service. Level 2, 3, and 4 are catered for in-service teacher. So if you have heard what I've shared earlier about how we plan for the 13-week course, a lot of our teachers who are already teaching for many years would not have attended that course. So a separate course is actually crafted to be shared with the other teachers who are in service, and it's called Exploring the Heart of CCE, because we believe that character education is both a science as well as an art. In this, the key focus is on facilitating students' learning and for them to understand how important it is and how to create the environment in school to nurture character. Level 3 is more focused on facilitating challenging discussion, and there is also a focus to strengthen dialogic learning. It will also enable some of the teachers who attend this course to then go back to their schools to then support the other teachers in enacting lessons or to talk about facilitation skills in their own classroom. Level 4, we have 2 courses. One is on, we call it the process-oriented approach to assessing student learning. So this is not assessing as an outcome, but to shift teachers' focus to ipsative assessment, to focus on meta-cognition to help students develop the meta-cognition for reflection. So we want to focus on the process of learning. The other is what we want to introduce as school-based research for teachers to engage in using lessons studied for character education. So this is mainly for teacher leaders in their schools to then build that community for professional learning within their own school. Next. Yeah. In the interest of time, I will not go into pedagogical practices. Yeah, next. Yeah. So we also highlighted here some of the areas of potential research that our center is interested in. But because we are only 1 year old, we are concentrating our effort in some of the things that we have shared with you. And these are potential for our next few years. And if there are interested collaborators, we'll be happy to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Melvin, Nicole, and Suzanne. That was absolutely wonderful, and I can see already some very positive comments coming through on the chat. I think all of us are slightly jealous of your the fact that you train all of the teachers in Singapore and therefore able to really give them kind of a really enriched focus on character and citizenship education. It's something that I think we'd all be very jealous of, to be able to have that possibility. I'm going to get straight into the questions, and to anyone else, please do feel free to bring those in the chat, or if you want to put your hand up or virtual hand up, then I will certainly bring you in as well. But I'm going to start with a question from Rosilia from University of Navarra in Spain, one of our great and other partners on this Flourishing series. And I think you were beginning to get to this towards the end, Nicole, because you spoke quite a lot about teacher education and kind of the focus of character education in there. But I think Rosilia's question is a bit more general, also saying, is there much of a focus on kind of character education and citizenship education across higher education in Singapore institutions? And do you have any kind of input within that space? Because clearly you've spoken quite a lot about schools, but does that map onto higher education as well?
Thank you. For us, we do work with higher education. In fact, our center in Singapore, there are certain groups and community of practice that is across universities. So they do come together to have a discussion. So recently, our center has also done a sharing with them on some of our work, and we are looking at collaboration with the higher institutes. But the concrete ones, at this point, because we are quite young, we have not done any concrete plans, but we are at the starting point of engagement. So a lot of times, there are requests to talk about teacher confidence for facilitations of contemporary issues and discussions in the classrooms.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Next question, I think, is to you in particular, Melvin, and it's a bit of a specific question about kind of humility and how humility is defined in your model. Sipak has talked about, asked about kind of particular questions about the kind of the arrows in your well-being strength-based model. But I suppose more generally, the question is humility. How does that fit?
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for this question. Humility is quite a generic concept, because I mean, we look at it quite generally. It's about awareness of one's limitations, being appreciative of others' perspective, and not to be too loud about your own achievements. So I think in general, those are the kind of definitions that we kind of think of humility. And humility is actually a strength that helps people to nurture and develop with someone of good character. I also have to add that our model is still a developing model. So a lot of the arrows that we drew are those that were pretty obvious to us. Like life meaning, life purpose is there's an arrow to meaning. And I think what the question is correct, is definitely possible for humility to be to be drawn from some of the purpose or some of the competencies that we've seen. But I just want to add that this is still a developing model, and we are still seeking a little bit more clarity about some of the constructs that we're going to include in the.
Perfect. Thanks for the response. And I think there's an open invitation to you there, CPAC, to liaise with Melvin maybe offline or through an email and explain kind of maybe how the links to humility might be emphasised more within there. To Michael Lamb next, who talks, and I agree with him, about your fascinating presentation and impressive work. And it's so comprehensive. I think that's the other thing that we're particularly jealous of, how much in depth and you're doing within and across the curriculum in that space. But the question that probably all of us want to know is challenges around implementing your framework and how you kind of address them. What kind of pushback or barriers do you potentially, or do you face, if any?
Maybe I will jump in here, and my colleagues can also add on. I would say the framework is new. It's not been implemented, but it's been shared. The ideas and the principles have been shared. I think one thing that we tell our student teachers is that they have to embody two kinds of identities. Because when they come in, often they've spent their pre-university years and their undergraduate years developing their expertise in their subject areas. So they come in with a very strong subject identity, whether they are physics teachers or mathematics teachers or English teachers and so on. But the other kind of identity that is newer to them is this idea of a character and citizenship educator. So I think there's always this tension that they have these two identities. So for example, last year I was teaching a character and citizenship class, and my class were physics students, and they told me that physics has nothing to do with values, that kind of thing. So they see themselves as physics teachers, but they don't see themselves as values educators. And what we're trying to do here is that to help them see values as integrated in every aspect of schooling, including their subject areas. So that's one challenge, like helping them negotiate and navigate and also see that alignment between values, character, citizenship, and their subject areas. I would say the other challenge would be Singapore's approach to character and citizenship has shifted over the years. So I actually wrote an article in the Journal of Moral Education where we analyzed the syllabus from independence 1960s all the way to the present. And when you look at the syllabus, you can see that there have been shifts. In the early days, there was this emphasis on moral adaptation, which means to adapt students to the moral values of the state. But I think over the years, with a more open consultative government, there's been a push for more critical engagement with issues. So just now, Nicole talked about how discussions of contemporary issues, even contentious, sensitive issues, have been brought into the classroom. For example, when the government released the budget in Parliament, the next few weeks, they brought this issue into the classroom and they got students to discuss, let's talk about the budget. Let's talk about how the government allocated money. What do you all think? And it's more constructivist, dialogic pedagogies, discussion-based pedagogies. Discussions in class have included things like the war in Gaza, the Ukraine war, so contemporary issues that are often contentious. I think one of the challenges we are facing is also sometimes teachers are not sure how to navigate the ambiguities and also the conflict that can arise because students will sometimes often say what they think. And teachers also now need the skill of what we call dialogic pedagogies, perspective taking, getting students to learn to listen to one another, getting students to appreciate differences. So these are pedagogies that we're also trying to introduce. And I think it takes time because not all teachers are used to this kind of approach to teaching.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Suzanne. And I have to say, I mean, I worked a lot in our citizenship education program that we had in the UK in the early days, and that dealing with controversial issues, getting proper dialogue, those sorts of areas was challenges all the way through. And it does take a particular sort of teacher who's able to do that. Great. Next questions. I'm going to go to one from Mr. A. Diraj. We really are traveling the world now from India. And I believe the question's framed at a character assessment for teachers that at the time of their recruitment. So is there anything that you're actually, I suppose, and I'm hoping I'm framing this question right, in terms of kind of analyze, I suppose what they say is, kind of one of the best instruments we've got for character education is actually the character of the teachers themselves. So is character ever taken into consideration in the kind of the teachers that are recruited in Singapore?
Maybe I'll take this question. So in Singapore, when we talk about teacher recruitment, I would also like to share that actually teaching is quite a highly desired vocation here. So it is quite competitive here for a teacher to for someone to apply for teaching. Do we do some kind of assessment? I wouldn't say that it is an assessment to talk about what are your values, but at the interview and the recruitment process, there's a component whereby a scenario is given to the applicants, and on the spot, they write a short response on their thoughts as well as their proposed action that they themselves would take in that situation. So that became then a conversation topic between the applicant as well as the interviewer during the recruitment session. They're more of a conversation before they move into the recruitment process.
Okay, that's really helpful. This is a quick one from Jan. How long does the CCE training course last? I don't know if someone can give us an insight, Nicole, maybe.
Yes. So for the CCE course, the one where I have shared in a little more, that is, we call it the CCE in Singapore context, is a 13-week long course. So it spans over 2 semesters. So 50% in your first semester, 50% in the second semester.
Okay, and what sort of time a week roughly would be focused on this?
Usually it's a once a week.
Okay, perfect.
So they have,
Excellent.
yes.
Okay, next question. I don't know who's going to answer this one from Raymond, but it's a very, very personal question. Something actually we at the Jubilee Centre looking and always have been looking quite closely at, and probably not mastered the research around this at all, but trying to do more in the space of kind of parents and parents' involvement and all of this. We all know the challenges, but the opportunities of bringing educational establishments, leaders and teachers together with parents to focus on carers and values. So are parents involved in kind of any of your modelling frameworks and work?
Maybe for us, for our center directly, our core work is with schools at the moment because we are pretty young. But of course, I will also want to share with you that a longer aspiration and vision is for us to influence beyond the education setting. So the work with the Higher Institute of Education, with university, work with parents, work with preschools, as well as other colleagues would be something that we would want to plan towards. Directly on parents, we are preparing some video resources, more for preschoolers as well as preschool teachers. But as we engage our colleagues in discussion, many also find that very good parenting tips for parents when they have toddlers or young children at home. So we are thinking of how we can then shape some of this to produce that series so that it will also be part of resources that we can use for parent engagement in this topic.
Yeah, excellent. And please do share that with us when you when you get to that, because it's something that is, I think, a challenge for many of us. Next question from Cynthia, and another measurement question, but this time impact. Now, it looks like, as you say, you haven't implemented the CCA measure yet, so it's hard to measure impact of it. But I suppose more generally, are character measures used in kind of schools in Singapore or indeed citizenship, or is that something that's kind of steered away from?
I mean, I would say that this is our current project actually. We call it the Flourishing School. We are also interested not just in the individual students flourishing, but more so the conditions that facilitate the flourishing of the student. So I think both measuring students flourishing, but also more so the conditions in the school environment. So one area of interest is like student agency. The extent to which there's choice given in the school, there is agency and voice for students to participate actively in decision making. So many of these aspects, what are the conditions that support flourishing is something that we are also interested in, not just the indicators of flourishing.
Perfect. Thank you. And I know we're short of time and it's hard to get kind of long answers to these challenging questions, but I hopefully can get time for a couple more questions. Mark Kendall's asked a particular question about conflict resolution skills and specifically responding to cultural bias, which again, we haven't got time for a long answer, but is an interesting topic. I think you started to talk around this, but please, any further elaboration?
Okay, I just want to mention that another area that we've started to develop is this notion of ethical literacy. So what is ethical literacy? It's not just the teaching of values or what are good values, because in a recent research that we did, we realized that most teachers, when they teach values, they tend to emphasize awareness, making students aware what are good values. When they discuss a news article or a current issue, they talk about, what are the dilemmas and then what they should do and so on. But I think we're trying to push this further and develop what is called ethical literacy. So this is where it involves more critical, even I would say post-structuralist types of methods. So for example, the question about cultural bias requires students to be able to understand, what are the different worldviews or the different philosophies that underlie a text. What is the bias and assumptions? Whose voice is speaking? Who is being privileged in that text? So these are the kinds of ethical literacy skills that we also want to include in our CCE core courses at teacher education level and on our in-service. We think that it's important that students not only know what are good virtues and they know how to practice good virtues, but they also have the analytical skills to be able to discern bias assumptions in text, especially given that we are living in this post-truth AI age. I think this has become more evident to us that teachers themselves need to be equipped with ethical literacy.
Perfect. I think we're bang on the time to finish there, so we will pause. I'm sorry we haven't managed to get to all of the questions, and there's some great questions there, and we'll save the chat and I'll send this over to our colleagues in Singapore if they want to engage. But just to say a huge thank you again to Nicole, Suzanne, and Melvin for another really enriching and interesting session with lots to learn and lots for us to kind of really think about and consider in our own context. As you can see, thanks to all of you for coming from around the world really and exploring these important topics. The next webinar we will be in January, on the 27th of January, and we'll be going to the Centre for Virtues and Values Education Centre, who are doing some fantastic work across Spain right now. They're based at the University Francisco de Victoria. So we'll see you all again in January. Please do, we'll send this link out and the slides out to everyone afterwards. Please do share these with colleagues. But wherever you are, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we will see you all again soon.
Thank you so much, everyone. See you.